Boys and Girls Club on safety, and
Good deal.
I was there with them and talked about a lot of good improvements.
Good.
Now we just need the money to do it.
Right?
The way the world goes around.
Yes, sir.
No, they did a great job, very thorough. Randy, I haven't seen you for a while, bud.
I like
Good, how are you?
Good.
this, and I was like,
Kind of miss you guys, you know. I'm telling you.
Oh, here we are. We're here.
well, I really like it. Just make sure it,
Well, now Vicky's here, so we can get started, so, yeah. 6 o'clock. Let me get ready to get started. The purpose of this workshop tonight is informational purposes only for council and planning commission. Tonight, we're going to talk about what the project, what it is, what it is not, to dismay some misinformation that's running around in the community. Members of the audience, you will have ample opportunity to ask questions at the 18th, the week of the 18th for the workshops. If you would like specific questions answered, please submit them to the city clerk 48 hours prior to the posted date of that meeting. And again, on the council meeting on the 27th, we'll have a full public hearing on the ordinance change as well. So tonight, just so we can get everybody's questions answered on council and information out for planning and zoning. So with that said, Shannon, you want to introduce our guests tonight? I think we know everybody else, so.
Sure. So with us tonight are the developers. So we have over here on the corner, Heidi Dragoo. In the middle, we have David Dragoo and Doug Dragoo. So they are here tonight to do their presentation and help answer questions as well. So.
Since you're talking, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. So first item on our agenda is the housing needs assessment and housing action plan discussion. So what I really wanted to do is kind of set the stage this evening on how we arrived at this particular site, all the work that has been done up to this point, and just a little bit of background on, what it took to get to where we're at right now. So in the binders, you will all have a copy of the housing needs assessment and the housing action plan. So many years ago, when the announcement of this transition took place, there was a lot of goals and priority setting that was taking place between the city and the county. And over, unanimously, it seemed like the number one item that was a big priority for us was housing. So with that said, we all knew that we had a housing shortage, but we really have to get into the details of how many units are we short, what price ranges are we short, what types of units, are they rentals, are they single-family homes, are they townhomes? So we submitted a request for a proposal to bring on a consultant to help us basically go through this housing needs assessment to identify those specific needs. So as you can tell, these are really long documents. I'm not going to go through them super specific, but what I did want to point out was some of the key takeaways from both the housing needs assessment and the housing action plan. So we started the housing needs assessment in August of 2021 with the final report being introduced in November of 2021. So it was about a 3 or 4 month process. As part of that process, we had a steering committee that was formed, which consisted of local community members from the city, the county, the chamber, the hospital, the school district, local nonprofits, local contractors, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. So these are all members of our community that basically represent, our major employers, our local government entities, and we wanted to bring them on board, because of their broad knowledge of the community, and also to help us push these strategies forward once they were identified. So again, some key takeaways from the housing needs assessment that was completed in the fall of 2021. Number one, public-private partnerships are needed to overcome the high cost of construction and market risk. And this is currently the situation that the city is engaged in with the Dragoos. City-owned land may be suitable to attract an experienced developer of rental housing, also the situation that we're in. Current zoning is not well aligned to incentivize new housing. So more zone districts that allow multifamily, duplexes, townhomes, and ADUs are needed. 80% of local employers, again, I mentioned this employer survey that had gone out to the folks in Moffat County. So 80% of local employers think housing availability and affordability is a moderate to severe problem within Craig. Over 57% of employers indicated that recruiting and retaining qualified employees is a moderate to significant problem. Moffat County's net outflow of residents, this is back in 21, this number's a little bit higher now. Net outflow of residents commuting is estimated over 2,000 per day. Those are people leaving our community to go work elsewhere. The needs assessment also identified that we needed between 55 and 80 additional rental units to achieve a healthy vacancy rate. That's now increased to over 100 in 2024. So the most significant gaps were 1 to 2 bedroom units and new quality construction. So as part of the assessment, we also wanted to have an action plan. We didn't want to just have data and numbers. We wanted to have recommended actions of how we can, bridge this gap and support more housing in our community. So as a result of the housing action plan, which this was completed in the spring of 22, so some key takeaways from that in reference to this particular project. So for rentals between 80 to 120% AMI, which this is what this project is targeted at, we could help with development fee reductions, which is something the city has taken into consideration. Infrastructure and cost sharing. So that's going after grants. And again, just this public-private partnership with investments. So as a part of this particular project, we did apply for a DOLA grant in the amount of $2 million for the infrastructure. Myself, Peter, the Dragoos, and Mayor Nichols were actually down in Manitou Springs last week doing our in-person presentation for this grant. They did actually recommend that we get full approval for this $2 million grant for this infrastructure. And then another recommendation was in-kind support with staff time, public works, et cetera, which is, what we've been doing internally as staff. So some of the steering committee's top 5 priorities: leverage city-owned land, which we're working on. Coordinate supply-focused employer approach. So again, this is our big target employers, our nurses, our police officers, our teachers, even entry-level positions, all the way up to management positions. Create an investment housing fund, zone for affordability, and craft community benefiting annexation policies, which doesn't necessarily relate to this project. So just to based off of all of those strategies, the consultants went out and looked at about 20 or 30 sites within Craig and Moffat County to see if they were suitable for development. Now, these were anywhere from just vacant parcels of land to property that was city-owned that had access to infrastructure. Of all of those sites that were investigated, the Woodbury site was the #1 site because it is city-owned, because it has good street connections and access to utility infrastructure, because it's within close proximity to community services, amenities, arterials, and employment opportunities. And we do have a plan for a transit center as well. So this came later on when we started doing the work with the Dragoos. They asked that we do a market study, more of like an absorption study. If we build these, how long is it going to take for them to become fully occupied? Is it worth our investment to do this? So we're still working on the market study, but I do have a couple of takeaways that I wanted to point out from that. So the demand for rental housing in the market is extremely high, especially for targeted household incomes at 80 to 120%. The primary market area has an overall surveyed occupancy rate of 98%, including 100% at the workforce middle income housing level. The most recently completed workforce middle income properties within the primary market area were fully leased within 1 to 4 months. And finally, this development, as new rental housing construction, will include features, unit sizes, and conditions that meet or exceed the market standard for its project type. So Mayor Nichols said again, this is a project that we want to inform the public of what it is and what it is not. This is not a low-income project. This is middle income, 80 to 120% AMI for our area.
What exactly do you mean when you say 80 to 120% of what figure?
So basically, we have the salaries in Moffat County, and that's one of the charts in your loose paper. Yeah, if you want to scroll, it's going to be, I think, page 100. So basically, the Colorado Finance and Housing Authority puts together a chart every year of what those incomes are, rental rates, people's salaries, and the like. And so that's what we base those AMIs off of. So you'll see in Moffett County up here, the 80 to 120% for a one-bedroom can range anywhere from $1,300 to $1,900. And then that goes up 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms. And then if you go over to the far right column, you can see what the income limit is per 1, 2, 3 person, and it goes up to 8 people.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, can I get a comment? And it may sound derogatory, but it's not meant to be. I've heard you list the members of this twice now, of the people that are involved with this. And you still don't have neighborhood residents included in that list. And that's a
Absolutely.
big glaring error. We learned that in the last month. And I think that I'd hate to have to run into what we ran into a second time.
Right.
And I think the people that live around these facilities deserve to be an active part in it. And I don't know how you get the word out, I really don't, but.
Well, and you bring up a good point. I had actually reached out to our consultant and said, hey, why didn't we involve the people of these neighborhoods early on, right? And so basically, our response is, these conversations with neighboring residents or neighborhoods, they don't usually begin until we're at this point, which is where we're at right now. Because if we would have gone to all of the sites identified and tried to get neighbors involved at that point where it's really preliminary, we'd still be doing that today. We just don't have the capacity to do that. But I understand what you're saying.
Or at least in a method of trying to get everybody in place all at one time. We can do something. I know what we're doing is not correct. I don't have a good answer. I'm just saying that I think we need to work harder to make sure there's more involvement with the neighbors.
That's what we're trying to do now with.
Yeah, I understand that.
Sessions and,
Yeah.
Shannon, did you come up with, what you sent me on research? How many times this has been out?
I did. So, what we wanted to address as well, there was a lot of questions of, this is the first time we're hearing of this project. This is the first time we've heard that this site is the #1 developable site within Craig. So I went back and did some research. Back in March of 2022, there was an article in the Craig Press discussing the potential future housing development sites. So there was the mention of the Woodbury site then, back in 2022, pretty much after the completion of our housing action plan, that mentioned that site as the top identified site in the plan. Then again in April of 22, another article appeared in the Craig Press discussing the results of the Craig Housing Needs Assessment and issuing a preliminary site plan for the 3 acres located at Woodbury Drive and First Street. That same article also appeared in the Steamboat Pilot on May 1st of 22. This is obviously more recent. Back in January, this project was presented to the Craig Housing Authority to approve the letter of intent with our developers here. And also most recently, back in January 27th, we had Jason Peasley with the Yampa Valley Housing Authority, who is one of our partners on this project, came and did a presentation to council, also mentioning the Woodbury housing development.
But you're right, Tom, that's why we're
Well,
doing what.
it wouldn't have blown up if they'd have known about it. No, just that was,
That's why we're trying to get input now.
yeah,
And
no.
that's what I said, if you have
And I
specific
appreciate it. I was just recalling in the whole list of people, we still didn't have residents on that list.
questions, And that's why we pulled it off the agenda at last council.
Yeah, good.
Premature to make a decision, so.
It's good. Like I said, I'm not,
No,
well, I
you
am
brought up-
picking, but I'm not doing it to hurt. I'm just
Right,
making a
you
point.
brought up a good point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you.
My concern, obviously, I think everyone in this room and at this table understands we need housing, based on this study. And in 2020, when I was on the stakeholder as a contractor, I think we all agreed on that.
Right.
The issue is I think we did have an agreement, but these 12 to 20 sites that were identified, how much were they looked into? Because I don't even know if we were invited a whole, I probably have an email, but I don't recall, and maybe that's my fault, getting emails to go visit these 20 sites. And I think it's, the issue's not the housing, the issue's the location. And then reading through this more earlier today, the suitability for this site says multifamily to 30 to 50 units, and we're proposing to triple that.
I had that exact same.
So, I know all the work that's been put into it, and the developers are on board, and I get it, but there was, you know, obviously this was the top site because it's probably, you know, you can incorporate a bus stop. There is infrastructure there. It is well graded. There's not a whole lot of site work. You know, I understand that, but I think it would be beneficial if we could see what the next top site was at 2, 3, 4.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
And those are listed, yeah. So we have the top 3 sites. So the second top site is the old hospital site, which is currently under development.
the other one's for Carpenter,
Right.
correct? Did that just, did we approach that at all? Or did we just say this is number 1, we're going with it?
I think that was more of what we entrusted the consultants to identify based on those criteria that the steering committee identified, like the, you know, accessibility to infrastructure and amenities and, you know, access and things like that. So based off of those, that's where the top 3 basically came about.
So if the consultants are stating 30 to 50 units, how come we're trying to triple it?
Well, and again, you have to remember this is back in '21. So this market study that we're currently working on is more current, and that's basically showing that there's at least demand for 100. So it's, I mean, it's increasing. Yes.
Does it have to be so huge all in one place, and especially in the middle of a park? Can it be a couple of buildings here, couple of buildings here, and a couple of buildings here? And I understand that putting everything in one giant building will be less cost to build, but that doesn't mean it's the final product that we want.
Right.
You know, I guess I don't know if maybe you guys will have conversation on that, but is there some way to parse this up a little bit? I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but if somebody wanted to put this next to my house, I'd be very upset. Now, maybe a couple of smaller buildings that hold more than, say, a duplex or a quadruplex, you know, I'm not sure where some of those lines, but I bet you guys have a real good handle on, you know, if you put this many in one place, you can develop it and make a profit and do this, and what I got out of the meetings recently were the smaller you go, the harder it is to develop and still be able to make a profit. But
I'll let the DeGruz answer that, and then let's let Shannon go through the presentation.
yeah,
And write your comments down so we can.
you bet. Okay.
So the short answer is yes. That's why we're here at the work session, is to try to understand some ideas. The original site plan was, I think it was about 3.5 acres, you know, Shannon, and then it got a little bit bigger, mostly because of this transportation center. In addition, the market study really reflected, you know, the demand. So we went to 120 units, and the other, you know, issue is once we put in infrastructure, it's really the same cost whether we build 1 building or we build 5. So one of the conclusions of this was for the city to put that in, and we said, well, why would we want the city to do that when there's potentially funding out there, you know, available, Shannon, that you guys were so great to go get. So the more density, the more efficient it is, but that doesn't mean what we've proposed is final. I don't think that's our approach.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Anything else right now before we write your questions and we'll try to get to them? Yeah, Shannon, go ahead.
And really, Mayor, that's all I had for the needs assessment and the action plan. So I think it'll transition well. We have the Dragoots that will give a presentation as well on the project. So if we want to kick it over to them and let them take care of item B.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. It's good to be here with everyone this evening. This presentation is about 12 to 15 minutes. I'll get through it a little bit quicker because Shannon did such a good job of covering a lot of it. But I'm David Dragoo with Colorado Outdoors. And so in front of you, you should have some packets. They're pretty long, but we have 4 reports in there. We have a site plan for you that you can look at in the first section. We have the 2021 Housing Needs Assessment that Shannon referenced. I'll reference it so you can follow along. We also have the Housing Action Plan, and then we also have the Yampa Valley Community Health Needs Assessment. And so on your screen here, this is a great example of an elevation. We know that this is just a version, and this, will probably change a few times. But we think it's important for you to see where we are today. This is our team. To my left is my dad, Doug, and to my right is my wife, Heidi. So we're the principals. We're a family business. We are headquartered in Montrose. So for those of you who know where that is, we've been there for quite some time. And I think it's important for you guys to know that we only do projects in rural Colorado. So we know the plight of small towns, and we have a business there also. It's a manufacturing business. And that's really how we got into housing. We have about 130 employees there. And I think the issues are that to run a good business, you have to have housing. If you don't have housing, you can't have a business. So we really learned that these are symbiotic things as communities grow. And in this next slide, this is actually our headquarters in Montrose. You'll see our building in the background there. That business there it actually makes outdoor equipment. So if you're a fly fisherman, you might know some of our companies. Ross Reels is one of them, Able, Airflow, and Dynaking. So we have 4 companies that are in that building. But we know from running these businesses that housing has become one of our top priorities. And so that really gets me to the Woodbury site. And when I show the site up on the screen, I think this is an important picture. This is north of our building. It's got a Fairfield Hotel in it. But what we've learned from the project in Montrose is that typically mixed use is the best way to go. Mixed use zoning or mixed use activity around a site. This is a great example. We've got a housing project that's about 500 yards to the south of this. And I think that's an important segue, because when we talk about the housing needs assessment and the housing action plan, and really the work that you guys have done on this, you'll see here the zoning around Woodbury and how diverse it is. You've got I-1, a light industrial to the east, residential medium density and high density to the west, and high density and medium density to the east. This is really a recipe for a great project, because you have a lot of activity down there. This again was one of actually 40 sites that were surveyed. I think 19, Shannon, were the ones that the consultants reference on page 40 of your housing action plan. Or, I'm sorry, page 24 of your housing action plan. And it's a mixed-use area that we think is really conducive to a successful project. And the primary roads, I think, are key, where you have First Street on the bottom, and you have Mack Lane and Woodbury Drive running north and south. So this is a picture of the site plan from page 10 of the housing action plan, what you guys had referenced earlier to the density, and then the transportation center on the right. This was done in 2022 with a design charrette, which was, I believe, the stakeholders in the housing action plan, and then the architects. And so you guys really did a lot of work on this, and we took this plan and we designed it to where we felt like we could fit a little bit more density and build a little bit better transportation center. And so just as a background on this project, this is one of the articles that Shannon mentioned. This was in May of 2022, so this was 2 years ago. I know in the city council meeting a lot was talked about, well, what about the jobs that potentially may be leaving from the mine closures? And I think what we're seeing is that the regional draw for housing is just extraordinary. The quote on the left, availability strained as approximately 2,000 Craig residents commute to Steamboat. And that was 2 years ago, so I assume that's probably the same or higher.
2,800.
That's a significant number, Mayor. Thank you that's a lot more than I thought. This is also the article Shannon mentioned in the Craig Daily Press. This is almost exactly 3 years ago. She identified the workforce that we're trying to fill in these units: teachers, police officers. I think it's important that folks know that this wasn't something that just came up. I mean, when we came into the project, it had been discussed for a few years. And I think this site was specifically discussed for a few years. So we get this question all the time. I think it's important to tell people what this is not. So this is not affordable housing. Those are all the things to the center and to the left. It is not market rate housing, which is all the way to the right. It's too expensive. This is workforce housing, and we refer to it as middle income housing. So that 80 to 120 AMI is area median income, and that's from Moffat County. CHAFA will update those every year, and the project has to follow those guidelines for those income levels.
David, can you talk a little bit about how someone would need to qualify? So we're not just letting people in. There's a qualification process that they have to go through to meet those income levels.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the Housing Authority is proposed to be a partner in this project. And what that means is that when incomes are vetted, you have to provide a valid wage stub. You can't just come in and say, I meet these incomes. There's a process you go through, and annually we have to do that as well. And so it's pretty strict, because getting into these units will have a high demand. So that's how we do it. Did that answer your question, Shannon?
Yes.
And so again, this kind of goes back to my point in the beginning, is that it's really difficult, we found in Montrose, to retain businesses when you can't house people. It's hard enough to pay them enough. It's hard enough to get them a pretty nice place to work. But we found that they really have to go together. And I wish, one of the things that we've learned in Montrose is I wish we would have put the housing in before, because now we're doing it and we're trying to catch up. And it's very, very challenging. So this is what we're proposing. It's 120 units. It's the newest apartments in about 40 years. I think the key here is that we want to connect the trails into Woodbury. We think it's a great sports complex. It was recently built, and we think it's outstanding. And also, the key is that the city is going to maintain ownership. So we're not getting ownership of the land. The city will maintain that. And I think the transit center is key. I think we want to actually keep cars off the road, keep people safer. There's also a big need to get to and from Routt County. This is a site plan. Again, you guys have seen there's a couple on the walls around. We're proposing the main axis off West 1st Street. I think one of the keys, if you can see my laser pointer on this screen in front of me here, is that there's really not safe crossings across the streets. And I think we're kind of concerned about that. We'd like to see that for folks that can get to the park. Again, this site is what we've proposed, but I think one of the goals today is to take some ideas back and see if we can make it work.
Now, when you mention a transit center,
Yeah.
in what I was looking at with the last documents from a few weeks ago, there was a bus stop.
There it is. This is more of a zoom in. So the bus stop will be a one-way. You'll come off West 1st Street, and then there'll be a shelter here. And when we mean multimodal, that basically means you can access this in several ways: car, bicycle, wheelchair, or walking. So it's multimodal. That's what the state refers to these as. So I think it will be the first bus stop on the south of town. And we've really worked hard with the regional transportation folks. They did a presentation at the last city council meeting, which I thought was outstanding. And there's really a need to get to and from and in and around Craig, and also up to Steamboat. I don't know if that answers your question, Tom. On that. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Again, just an example of an elevation. We love your feedback on this. We think it's a great design, but we're going to get more and more of these and get feedback from you all on how to do it better. Obviously, this is a work session day, so we're happy to answer any and all questions that you may have had. We've got some additional slides in here to reference, but with this, I'll open it back up to Shannon. I think you've got some more folks who are going to present.
My name's Doug Dragoo. I'm David's dad, and lucky enough to have Heidi as my daughter-in-law. Heidi is also our grant writer, so she was up in Colorado Springs with Chris and Shannon, and we also helped participate in the writing the grant that is going to be about $1.9 million. So we're proud to be part of that. My takeaway from, I believe it was last week's meeting when the neighbors were here and they were upset, seemed totally to be about misinformation. And maybe there were new people that have moved into the area that didn't understand that this was going on. But if you look back through these studies, and if you look back at the newspaper articles, it's there. And these consultants list in these reports that they had community members involved in their process. Now, we didn't do that. Our job, we're your partner. We've been asked by the city to come in and help create a vision to help Craig. And that's our reputation. That's what we do. We've done it before, and we're doing it now in about 4 other communities. One of the things that I really want you to think about is this is not an apartment project. This is really an economic development project. And if you don't start with housing, as David said, and as Shannon said, you can't attract companies and you can't keep workers. And we learned that the hard way because we didn't start out in this business to be developers. What we have learned is how to retain people and how to get businesses to come to communities that are lacking in either services or lacking in housing. The first questions we get, we have an on-staff person who does economic development. And the first questions we get are, how's your hospital? What are your schools like? And what's your housing like? And probably the density of this project, I'm going to take responsibility for and take the heat if you guys want to throw the heat at me. And the reason why I did it this way is because I looked at this as from a completely different vision. This is your community center. This is where stuff is going to happen. This is close to downtown. This is where people are going to live. They're going to walk. Some people are going to walk to work. Some people are going to get on the bus. But fortunately, we now know that with the help of the city and our team, we're going to get the money to help get this project over the finish line. And the biggest piece of this that I really want you to think about is in October of this last year, the state passed new legislation called Proposition 123. And it's actually incredible considering our government. The vision for the state is to create workforce housing in not only small rural towns, but also in the Front Range. And our experience has been that the Front Range wins all the time. And it really makes us mad. And that's why we started what we're doing, is to convince the housing authorities, DOLA, CHAFA, the people on the Front Range that distribute the money and that make the decision as to where the money goes, to, not forget about us. Don't forget about the Craigs and the Montroses and the Gunnisons of the world. we have businesses, we have workers, we have the same problems you do. And this program is really absolutely incredible, and it's a game changer. It's going to be a game changer for the state, and it's going to be a game changer for you guys. And we know how the system works, we know where to go, we know what to do, and we know how to get it done. And Derek, when I just heard this earlier before the meeting, that you used to be a home builder, or maybe still are. And the biggest issue with building anything today is cost. It's just stupid expensive to build anything. And what the state has done is it's taken, I believe it's 3.5% of all of the sales tax that's collected by the state, and they put it into a fund. And that amounts to about, and my numbers are going to be off, but I'm going to be close, about $350 million a year. So what we have to do, and what Shannon and her team and our team have successfully done, is shown you that it can be done. And we just did it last week. So, but we're not done. Proposition 123 has other pieces to it that also allows cheap equity. It has some lower interest rate financing. And at the end of the day, what that does is it lowers the cost of construction. So guess what? We can now offer you your apartment at $950 a month instead of $1,650 a month. And what we do is we become a partner with you. The city remains entitled to the property, so you still have control. The housing authority typically, but it can also be the city, has authority over who gets to rent these units and make sure that these units are rented to people that are supposed to qualify for them, and not, some guy that says he only makes a certain amount of money, but he really doesn't. And at the end of the day, what we end up with is a project that costs less money and allows us to rent to someone that normally wouldn't be able to afford it. And the two big hot buttons at the state right now are housing and transportation. And guess what you guys just hit? You just hit the housing and transportation home run, because that's what the state is providing funding for. So typically, when you're a businessman, especially when you're in the real estate industry, you try to follow the money. And that, our job is to help you guys make the right decisions so that we can provide a project for you that not only fits your needs, but that also makes you think about the future and think about, oh, gosh, these guys are trying to build 120 units over here. They're going to ruin our neighborhood. This is going to be awful. How about we're creating a community in Woodbury that is going to become almost like a hub for Craig. And our next job, once we get done getting this housing piece done, whether we end up reducing the number of units or changing the road systems, is to look at the next piece of Craig that needs development, that needs help, that needs economic support. And that's what, if you look at the brochure in the front of your packages, that's exactly what we did in Montrose. And we went to the state, we went to the city, we went to the counties, and we found out what all of the incentives are that all of those groups offer. And then we went out and recruited businesses that needed those kind of incentives, whether it's a new machine to build your widget, or whether it's a job creation incentive, so that if you create more employees, you get more money. And there are lots of ways to do this, but it really starts with housing. And please, when you all leave today, and especially the neighbors, we're not here to be the bad guy. We're here to make the vision that Shannon has been talking about and that you guys have been talking about a reality. And some of those things are going to end up being change of, some of you might not like the colors of the project. Some of you might not like where the roads come in. We may end up, I don't know, have you got that little thing, Dave? Yeah, I don't know if we've got a site plan. I need to, yeah, okay. So there, as Dave was showing, there's an access up here onto Woodbury. Well, from what I heard last week, maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe the neighbors don't like that. So let's move that second access down here. And we move another building so that we can get that traffic off of Woodbury. There's a really great opportunity for us here to create what we call a pocket park. And there's also a really great opportunity to create a really cool trail system that can come from Woodbury through, and you can see it's kind of designed already on here. It goes around the baseball field and comes out at the transportation center. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be talking to you about in the future. And those are the kind of things that we're open to. And I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but I just wanted you all to understand that this is the time to strike. The state is not going to have this program around forever. And already the first round of this funding happened, and they had, I think, 500 applicants, and they got, I don't know, 50 funded. So there's going to be a ton of applicants, there's going to be a ton of competition, and the presentation that Shannon gave in Colorado Springs to DOLA was ranked as the #1 presentation and outcome, meaning that they're going to fund the grant. Likely. We're still, you know.
Disclaimer here, the board recommended it's up to the director to actually fund it. So it's not official till we get the letter, but 99%. So
Looking good.
99, but it's not official yet.
So I will be quiet now and let you guys ask questions. And
One of the good things here, and the Dragoos, we sat through what, 8 more housing now presentations at DOLA? And I even pointed this out to the committee when I started the presentation. And we were next to last? And I said, look at us, we have our developers here with us. None of these other projects did the developers come in and participate with the presentation. So when these folks talk about their small town and they want this project to go, and more encouraging, they're saying, let's make this work. So based on some input, let's make this work. So I'm encouraged a little bit more. I just met them in Manitou Springs. You know, Shannon and Peter has described this developer has been easier than anybody else the city has come in contact with. So from that standpoint, I think we can try to make this project work. So, you want to move on to item C, or?
Sure. So some of the questions that were raised at the P&Z meeting and during public comment during the last council meeting had to do with impacts. You know, what is the impact going to be to traffic, to crime? You know, can our water and wastewater systems handle this? And another item we touched on a little bit too was, you know, what about park amenities? What about the skate park and the pickleball court and a field house? And so we have some of our department heads here tonight that I wanted to touch on some of those items. They've done some research, again, to, you know, give some better answers on what those impacts look like. So I want to start with Marlon. Obviously, he's our building official, and he wanted to touch a little bit on kind of the planning and zoning process, the replat, you know, how this will actually meet the land use code, and all of that good stuff. So Marlon, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. So I'll kind of start with just outlining the process for approval if you guys choose to go that route. And so the process will consist of 3 separate approvals, essentially. On March 26th, you'll have the replat, which is considered a minor subdivision. And that replat from Mike Frere is in the packet as well. This replat basically cuts Woodbury into 3 separate lots. Lot 1A would be the lot that the housing would be proposed to be on. And so this replat basically outlines the boundaries for the 4.4 acres. We needed the boundaries set in order to do a rezone. So on the 26th, there'd be 2 separate public hearings. The first one would be for this replat. And if that gets approved, then we'd be looking at rezoning Lot 1A to residential high density. And prior to the 26th, you'll have a detailed memo from me and supporting documents for both the replat, rezone, descriptions, plenty of information, additional information that we're not going to go over tonight necessarily. So if you approve the replat on the 26th, then like I said, you'll be considering approval to rezone the newly formed Lot 1A to residential high density. And the residential high density district allows for multifamily buildings up to 24 units, which is what they're proposing. That's our max for residential high density is 24 units per building. And so obviously between grants and everything else, the zoning approval is always, those grants are contingent on timing of that. So that's why we're looking at doing the replat and rezone as first steps, but at the same meeting. And then if that does get rezoned and you guys do approve that, then we would, that's when the developer and the city would be working together to pin down a site plan based on some of those recommendations, maybe from the public and from council, or, you know, and working with Dragoos to make this palatable. And so that would be on down the road once we have design and the site plan approval. That's where we were planning on a considerable amount of community outreach and that sort of thing as well, obviously, and getting some community input at the design stage. And so the site plan would go to P&Z Commission to start with, and they would review that and either recommend to council either to approve with conditions, or deny the site plan. And the site plan would pretty much, a final site plan would consist of pretty much all the final details that we'd need for the project. It would, let's see here. So basically it would detail the building locations, elevations, colors, civil design such as final grades, landscaping, utility infrastructure, parking areas, entrances, etc. And at that point, we also have to have commitment letters, commitment to serve letters from all the utility providers and that sort of thing. And by that time, those details have been incorporated into the site plan as well. So that's kind of what the site plan would consist of. And that's really when we get into the nitty gritty of figuring out the where, what's, and how many's and all that of the project at that point. So then obviously planning and zoning, like I said, would give a recommendation, and then council would vote to either approve with conditions, or deny the site plan. Once that is, if that is approved, that's the soonest that construction could be considered to begin and that the project would be approved. So that's kind of the outline of what the next steps will be. And then as far as the current concept plan they have, the current concept plan, for the most part, meets all of our current land use codes for building size, setbacks, landscaping, and architectural design. Granted, we know the architectural design could change, like they said, multiple times, but at least the type of buildings they're looking at would meet our current design standards. So we do not have a specific density standard in our land use code for units per acre or anything like that. However, multifamily units in residential high density districts are required to have a minimum of 15% of the lot as landscaped green space. This lot has room for that, and their concept plan meets those requirements. If they do request any deductions or variances from our standard requirements, then that would most likely be done with a PUD district overlay. And a PUD district is basically, we have a set of standards that allows some flexibility for a project. If council decides that there's enough of a benefit to the community. So we have certain things listed as benefits. Some things could be additional green space, but we also have transportation and affordable housing as one of those benefits that meets that criteria. So essentially, if the council believes we're getting enough benefit based on one of those criteria, then let's say it was parking or something of that nature, we could potentially, council could potentially approve a reduction or that sort of thing based on the site plan. Now, obviously, we haven't gotten that far into it yet to know. A majority of all of this already meets those requirements, our standard requirements. So if it meets all our standard requirements, there's no need for that anyway. But that is the language we have in our code. And so, and then I did just briefly I did some basic investigations into how many vehicle trips a typical mid-rise 3-story complex creates. Of course, there's multiple factors that affect this. However, I was surprised to see that all the studies I could find were all pretty similar. Most developments of this size created around 50 peak AM trips, so per hour. That's at the peak, so typically 7 to 8, 8 to 9, somewhere in there. Between the 10 I could find for similar projects of this size and this type of area, not downtown New York City type of deal. The average for all 10, when I averaged them out, and they were all very similar anyway, was about 54 AM peak trips per hour and about 58 PM peak trips per hour. Now, this isn't a scientific super in-depth study, but I was surprised to see that a majority of them fell pretty close to that range based on the type of building it is. Single family homes create considerably more traffic per unit, per home. And obviously the high rise 10, 20 story buildings create considerably less. So this was just based on a typical 3-story type of mid-rise building is what I could find. That just, like I said, that doesn't, in no means is a traffic study because we don't know what's existing use and what existing numbers are out that way. But it gives you kind of an idea of what, if you have two entrances and you split that 50-50, kind of approximately maybe how many peak trips per hour at the most crowded times would be, just to kind of give you an idea. At any kind of transit center, even a smaller one like this we're proposing here, that does reduce these numbers on the studies that I could find that had that. But I didn't take that into account. But when it's provided, it does seem to decrease those as well. So that's kind of most of what I have. I did speak with the fire chief, and he has no issue with capacity or building height or size or anything of that nature. If we change layouts and we, once we get entrances figured out and all that, then obviously we'll need to keep him in the loop when it comes to those design elements so that we can make sure, everything from fire hydrant location and everything else, just to make sure he's on board. But he's seen no issues with the proximity or the buildings or the density or anything like that, as far as it taxing any other anything that they can provide as far as service for fire. So anyhow, I think that's all I have for right now, Shannon.
Marlon, I just wanted to add one more thing, and we touched on this a little bit, I think, during the P&Z meeting, but when this first started, we also had reached out to CDOT to see if they would require a traffic study. And basically because it was not going to increase traffic by 20% at the highway intersections, they did not require a traffic study. So I just wanted to add that on to some of the traffic statistics.
That is correct, Shannon. I meant to mention that, and I didn't get to that. So yeah, that is correct. They, even though the First Street is a local street, we contacted them right out of the gate to make sure, because they do die in. First Street does die into two CDOT controlled right of ways, and they reviewed it and had no issue with the amount of traffic that was going to be produced at 394 there, or 13. So thanks, Shannon.
All right. The next item that I wanted to touch on, so we have Ryan Dennison here, who's our Parks and Rec Director. Again, there was a lot of conversation about, what's going to happen to the east side of the lot. Why can't we put this development on the east side of Woodbury? So this is something that Parks and Rec has been working on for a while. So I just wanted to show this for the benefit of the public. I'm sure some of you have seen this. These are some concepts for future development for a skate park, pickleball courts, and then obviously you can see there's still space for future development. Ryan, is there anything you want to elaborate on a little bit more for that?
No, really, Shannon. This was just early last year. We went in and purchased the property for park amenities for the park expansion, and for future amenities like the skate park or pickleball courts slated for that section there.
So I thought this was important to note that we weren't, neglecting some of the park, I guess, amenities that people had mentioned, that this is obviously a concept that is planned for the future. So just wanted to point that out. Oh, go ahead, Derek.
When we have development, and I understand quality of life, and I'm all on board on that, but a lot of it, we've heard from the residents, and
So why did we go out and buy that?
Well,
Yeah.
exactly.
Why did we buy that 6
And I
acres?
just still can't get over the point that I know the initial study was a 3-acre plot with 30 to 50 units. This has since been bumped up to 4 acres. And we're tripling it. That's where and I don't want to sound like I'm all in favor of it.
Well, or and I'll add too that if you listen to the community, I think there's a lot of cry for gym space and field house and things like that. So you look and say, well, pickleball courts potentially, and a skate park could potentially be put in the corner that's proposed for development. and field house space could be there, and then it could all be used for park space. So I'm just saying, I understand that, but that sketch I don't think is as in stone as, right? This is a conceptual drawing still.
It's just a
Yeah.
conceptual. There's a need to, or for both pickleball and the skate park amenities. Where in the community can they go? Where, and it just really made sense for Woodbury. In my opinion, as part of the master plan, they're both a part of that in there.
Well, that's a good site for a future rec center as well.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if we were ever gonna talk about a rec center down the road, that property,
How much
Pretty
is
good
left
chunk.
there, Ryan, space?
So you could fit another football field directly south of that.
All right, so I also asked Carl, who's our water and wastewater director, to put together some numbers. I know there was some questions about capacity as to whether, we could handle additional sewer, water, et cetera. So, Carl, if you want to touch on some of the points you put together, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about some engineering estimates. The breakdown of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units may end up being slightly different, but this has a negligible impact on the overall conclusion. So water use would be at about 37,500 gallons per day. That's a small portion of what we produce daily, and depending on the flow rate, we're operating anywhere from 33 minutes, if we could actually run at a low flow rate, up to as short as just a few minutes in time. So not a huge increase. It's only 2.3% of our water usage. So that increase in demand is not significant. And there are 2 8-inch water lines that are within reach of the development, and we could easily handle the additional demand while maintaining pressure and flow. So both the water treatment plant and the water distribution system, we don't foresee any significant impact from this sort of development. And then the sewer treatment plant and collection system capacity, the engineers estimate the wastewater flow to be about 30,000 gallons per day. The treatment plant usually operates at about half the design capacity, which is 2.45 million gallons per day. So it's roughly a 1% increase in the design capacity, toward the design capacity. So it's just again a very small increase, pretty insignificant as far as the wastewater treatment plant goes. And so we've modeled our collection system in this area, looking at some other potential developments, and I put a little graphical representation in there. Wastewater is usually most easily represented by equivalent residential units, or EQRs. So an EQR is basically what a typical single-family residence would demand per day for both consumption and demand. And so the EQR of this project is estimated to be 86 EQR, so essentially equivalent of 86 single-family residences that were typical 3.5 people and had an irrigated area of less than or equal to 2,500 square feet. So pretty much a typical home. So this development would equal about 86 of those homes. And so the limiting section of the sewer main on this, represented in the green for that area, is 1,388 EQR. So again, it's a minimal impact, about 6% of the available capacity to satisfy this development. And also we have identified the areas in yellow as having reduced, but well above what's required EQR due to grit in the system. And as those on council that we're part of the budgeting process. No, we've budgeted to have that grit removed, and that's one of our capital projects this year. So that will also increase that capacity.
All right, thanks, Carl. We also have Chief Cochran here with the police department. We asked him to put together some estimated call volumes based on some other similar complexes here in Craig. So, Chief Cochran, if you'd like to give us your results.
Sure. So to start with, very difficult task here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have any other workforce housing that would fit in this category. So basically, I took with our comm center and had them break down for 2023 our entire call volume located at any apartment complex that we have. So 13 different complexes in the city with a total of about 601 units. We do have one complex that has 120 units, but that is low-income housing. So taking those 601 separate units, we averaged approximately 1,762 calls, which is 9.6% of our total call volume for the year. I have been in communities where that number is as high as 25% of your call volume per year at the apartment complexes. And you break that down, it averages out to about 2.93 calls per complex per year, or per unit per year. Now, we include also not just law enforcement calls, which can be anything from a barking dog to damage to a vehicle and anything in between, but we include EMS calls because in this area, as council knows, law enforcement responds to both. So adding an additional 120 units would roughly increase the call volume by 350 per year. Now, I will tell you that from my past experiences, anytime you have a new complex, that number is usually much lower for the first 2 to 3 years. So you're not going to meet that 350 per year. Would be very unusual. After that typical 2 to 3 year period, then you kind of equal it out to what the average is in the community. So at 350 calls a year, again, some of those calls are, they heard a noise at the window. So it's a call that doesn't take but just a few minutes. But adding 350 a year would not be a strain on the police department. I don't think that would be a problem at all. And if you care to see the breakdown on the second page, I've got all of our apartment complexes, the number of units they have, and then the number of calls. I will tell you that we also included Sunset Meadows 1 and 2 because that is in the city limits and we do respond to calls there. But if you'll notice, the highest call volume at those units were EMS calls. Our 120 unit was Columbine Apartments, and we spend quite a bit of time there. But again, we don't have any apartments in the community that we can say are workforce housing that I'm aware of. So you tend to see a higher call volume at some of these other apartment complexes, and it's because of the amount that's being charged for rent. It's for low-income housing. And a lot of times those are more active. But we've got a variety of apartments, some that we spend very little time at. And then we've got some very small apartments that we spend a whole lot of time at, but nothing like we have that's being proposed to be built that we can compare it to.
So, Mayor, as far as department head information on potential impacts, that's all we have. But I did want to mention, you know, we've got 3 letters of support that are in the back of your packet. One from the hospital, one from the city of Steamboat Springs, and one from CNCC. Again, re-emphasizing, you know, the importance of having attainable housing in the community, how it's affecting their recruitment. You know, I think we hear it over and over all the time from these entities that they have workers come in, they sign a contract, and then they have to redact because they can't find a place to live. So this is our, some of our major employers that are fully endorsing this project because of the struggles that they face in trying to recruit employees. So I just wanted to mention those letters of support.
Okay, questions? We got the developers and department heads, so, my job on this, based on this project, first of all, we haven't had a project of this size 40 years plus, certainly not in my time. So we're trying to put information together as best as we can to answer at least the questions we've had at this point. So I think Shannon's done a good job of trying to put together what we've heard so far. And again, during the community outreach on the week of the 18th, we'll have some more questions that can be written or asked that night, or even council, if you want questions answered specifically after you leave, give it to Liz, and we'll have answers for you, hopefully. So, Tom, you had a lot. You want to go?
Yeah, I do. Did you say you built 4 of these already?
4 of these projects.
Yes.
We've done a mix of them. Doug can answer a few that we've done outside of Montrose, but the one in Montrose, it's called Base Camp Apartments. It's got 96 units. I think we got the question of how many people would be in these units. We average about 1.4, 1.5 people per unit, and they're market rate. They're not workforce on those.
So it may seem like I'm harping on these things, but how many of these anywhere in Colorado have you seen been built inside a city park?
Well, I'll answer this question is the project we've done in Montrose is a bit unique. I got the question from, or I think the comment was made at City Council that property that is public and goes private never goes back. I think that it was, I'm paraphrasing on it, but the one we did there, we actually bought 160 acres, zoned I-2 heavy industrial, and we actually donated 41 of it back to the city. Now it's a public park. So it can go both ways. Some are built on parks, some are built on I-2 heavy industrial. I think it depends on feasibility and what the needs are. So
where are some that have been built on parks?
I don't know, I don't know.
Okay, it just is. I'm
But-
getting stuck on putting a set of apartments this large in the middle of of a really beautiful city park.
I would say the zoning P is different than a park. Because when I go out to the sports complex, the north end is excellent. It's well built, good lighting, good. In fact, we drove around today on our way in. It was pretty snowy, so you couldn't see all.
Yes.
But that's not where you'd want to put it. But P, public, we've seen that happen many times, actually. Yeah.
In a park.
Zoning for P, public, which could be a park, could be open space. It's
Well, open spaces and parks are different things.
Sure.
I understand. I was just trying to get this, just because I just struggle with putting something like this in the middle of a great park, and that's my personal opinion. I've worked on different facilities to go into a park, and it's always a standard thing, like you're building a rec center or something. Don't put one of those in the middle of a park, because you never get that park space back.
yeah. Fair point. Well, I would say
And maybe that's another thing. I didn't even think about a trade for something.
Well, we trade because we thought it was
Put up a trade.
the right thing to do. We actually gave them, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think 2 answers to that is, one is it's in the corner, it's not in the middle, and number 2 is identified by the community. We didn't say, let's go do the park. We said, well, where's the best site, and it was already there.
But I think we've all learned that we didn't really represent the community. There was a lot of organizations in the community, but not the residents of that community. And, they're just as important as anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's,
And you're right. I would just say, if you go back to that master plan too, you'll see what's very interesting on that plan is I-1 zoning next to low density housing. So technically, we could build a manufacturing shop right in someone's backyard currently,
Yeah,
right?
not in a city park.
Right, but I could build it up against someone's house, so which would be strange to me.
Well,
So-
let me give you an example. Probably, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, we were addressing auxiliary dwelling units, okay? In Denver and large cities, those are considered to be incredibly beneficial because their population densities are so high that it drives up house costs. And to try to spread that out a little bit, putting these ADUs into the towns is really a good idea. I
Yeah,
think.
that's debatable.
We looked at putting ADUs in low-density residential in Craig, and it was a resounding against.
No, I'm gonna have to correct you on that. You guys all voted in favor. I was the only one that said, I don't agree with putting ADUs in an R1 district.
But we went with that because nobody thought of it the way you were looking at it.
But-
They didn't, and I agree with, I was actually for them.
I know you were.
Yeah, so, but what I'm getting at is, your point though, was I didn't move into this neighborhood to have ADUs right over my fence. I didn't move into this park area to have 5 apartment buildings built. And yeah, you can call it on the end, but it's park property. Right now, it's zoned 0. And I just don't, I guess
But there's a
I'm
little
struggling with that.
difference between encroaching an ADU on an existing R1 property
Yeah.
where you're disenfranchising the person that moved into there
Yeah.
for that property,
That's
where I think there's a lot of mixed feelings on this property that we're talking about here, but it's a separate piece of property. And I guess I just wanted to mention one thing that Doug brought up on the access, when you brought up there. And I guess that's the thing. I mean, I know there's a lot of mixed feelings, but what I heard a lot of in that meeting was that, traffic, kids, the park, et cetera. And I mean, I think what you said is kind of what my thought was, you eliminate some of this access higher up into the Woodbury area. But is there even any way to make that a large cul-de-sac where you don't even have any through traffic that would come into this development that would kind of protect those neighbors a little bit more?
I don't see why not. I mean, it would probably take up, that little area that we were thinking about putting a little pocket park in.
Well, I was thinking even if you get it a little further down past, there's this map here. I mean, you got these 2 residents here. You could almost even put it down into this area just so there wouldn't be
Yeah,
through traffic.
Are you still kind of talking about a
No, I'm talking even potentially further, cul-de-sac.
down in here, putting a
I mean, I don't know
cul-de-sac
where
right in here?
exactly, but I'm just saying you would, I think, address a lot of the concerns of through traffic and their younger aged kids, playing with friends across the street, going to the park, et cetera. It's just for food for thought.
Again, that's what this whole meeting was about, was food for thought. And unfortunately, last week, it got a little out of control. And I understand why. I mean, I have 4 kids, I have 4 grandkids, and I get it. And, but we're not in Denver. We're in Craig, Colorado, that's had the kicked out of it because of the coal mines. And, we're trying to figure out a way to help you guys not only provide workforce housing, but to survive, and to bring in better businesses, and to bring in businesses that will pay the wages that you guys need to live in such a beautiful community. And
I guess don't misinterpret. I think the layout has a lot of potential. I think the whole project is a benefit to Craig if we can provide housing for these employers on a medium, or what'd you call it, medium income or whatever the technical term is. I mean, it's not going to be low income.
Yeah, and the only last thing I'm going to add, and whether it's this site, another site, wherever you guys end up deciding. We'd like to be your partner. I think the mayor had a discussion with the mayor in Montrose about the quality of our company, and I think he got a good review. But the reason why we use city-owned or county-owned or housing authority-owned property is because these grants require matching funds from the cities. And so our theory is we don't want to come to you guys and say, hey, we're gonna do this project with you. Could you give us $1 million? And the easiest answer is to say, can we find a piece of ground that's worth $1 million that can be contributed into this partnership that the state will recognize as matching funds? So that's kind of a, I heard last week people going, well, why don't these guys just go buy a piece of land and do it themselves? That's why.
Oh, I understand the concept, and I think the partnership makes sense.
And that leads a little bit right into what my question was. So if this location becomes a no-go, does that kill everything that's trying to be done with this project? I mean, so you're indicating we can't use a private piece of ground because that'll kill the grant funding, which is going to kill the profitability of it. I get it. And I don't know that the city has another piece of property that potentially fits. Is that kind of what I'm hearing through this?
It will probably, I don't know the answer to this, but my guess is it would probably kill the current grant that was just awarded, just because it was awarded for this location. But again, I could be wrong. So that's a consideration.
I think the answer is, on top of what he said, we could look at another site, but this was one that was already identified. I keep going back to that, I know, but you guys know your community much better than we do. We would certainly look at another one, because I think there are other potential locations. We don't know where they are. It's always challenging to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have plans, elevations, engineering, soils reports, literally thousands of dollars of time and money invested in this site. Because, when we were given all this information, it was, hey, Woodbury's the site, and we're like, okay, let's go.
And that's not your, the fact that
Right,
there's a
right.
little bit of this crossroads is not your fault.
That's,
But I think what this city council essentially has to decide is, is this the right site? Irrelevant to all of what's already been put into this, right or wrong. Is this an appropriate site for what we want to do? I think we're all in agreement.
You're right.
The housing is what we need, right? I don't hear anyone up here saying, hey, we don't need this housing. That's not, I don't think that's the deal. But is the site appropriate? Do we want to give up that piece of land attached to a park specifically? That's the question.
Yeah, and the only last item that I would add, and again, as David said, it's your community, and I don't live at Woodbury, but we've based this project on the current construction numbers, and those are changing and change all the time, and so I don't know if we can do this in another location and offer the same rents. I mean, I just don't know that. You guys give us another challenge and we'll go try to figure it out. But it will also set us back probably a year. Just, because it takes so long to do all these, it's like Derek, I think, can back this up. I mean, you go to order a soils report and it takes you, 3 months. And you order an appraisal, it takes 6 months,
So let's say, again, hypothetically, if there's another site, then you'd have to write another grant, and then you'd have to be dependent if that grant got approved or not. Is that kind of?
That's right.
Yeah, and you'd also have to, I think, talk to your DOLA rep and make sure that you're not kicking somebody in the stomach at the state that has recommended giving you guys $1.9 million based on this project.
And that's something I wanted to touch on, Doug. Like, the first thing when we go for these grants that they ask for are these needs assessments. And if we're going after a property that's not identified in here, that pretty much puts us out of contention. And Doug's right. We build these strong relationships with these regional DOLA reps for this money. If we were to give back a $1.9 million grant, that's not going to look good for us in the future. So that's something we just got to, keep in mind for future projects.
It's interesting. I think when we look at Montrose and we say what would we have changed about that project, it would have been to add open space around it, because these projects are around for a long time. And the more amenities they have, what we have found is the more people want to live there and they enjoy it and they're sustainable. So there's the other chapter of this. It's not just building it, it's maintaining it for a long, that's right.
Well, so all these other complexes in our community, though, probably didn't start out low income. Who's in charge of the AMI? Like, who makes that decision that someday down the road, then all of a sudden it's down to 80%? 50, like, who does that?
Good question. The Housing Authority is a partner. It'll be deed restricted for 30 years, which is the recommendations of CHAFA.
And what if they don't fill?
Yeah,
Well, it's a great question. I think that's why we did the market study. So we didn't include as another 600 pages of stuff that we thought was too long. The idea is we don't know, but the market studies, really say with a high degree of certainty that there's a need and the likelihood is high. I can tell you that there's a regional employer that has said, I will lease half of these. To me, that's not anyone that we've talked about yet. And so I kind of going, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I don't know exactly.
But are you guys, with that said though, are you guys on the hook, whether it takes 6 months or a year? You've got it. It's your deal to make that happen or not. I mean,
Yeah, not only are we on the hook, but we place a deed restriction on this piece of property, so we can't sell it to Derek and have him go, oh, hey, all right,
subordinate.
I'm going up on rents. And that's what we give up. And there is another piece of this that is a property tax piece that I know Peter got into at one of your other discussions, which we will eventually have to get into, because that is another piece of why you want to use public property, is because it's sales tax exempt. So in investment property, its value is not how many units it is or how cool of a parking lot it has. It's how much money does it generate. And so if you don't have property taxes, it increases the value so that you can justify lower rents.
Makes the numbers work.
It makes the numbers work. Exactly.
The public-private partnership.
Yeah.
That it takes to build these now. And Columbine was built Section 8. so the income restricted way back, so.
Well, I mean, I'm just, all of these apartments, you know, I walk by them and they don't add to the community, that's for dang. I mean, it's
Right.
a rough place in our communities.
Well, you see the call volume.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and after 30 years, I mean,
Yeah, that's what I mean, is
that might be the case.
Mhm.
But, you know,
Yeah.
all the ones we're looking at are 40 years old. And no one's fixed them up and no one's, you know.
I mean, so if we found let's just hypothetically, if we found another site, the city could purchase this site and then we could work together then too.
Yep. And I think it was alluded to, it's probably another year and a half in that case, because Prop 123 will require, it's called land banking. We have to meet certain AMIs and that are more restrictive, which means we have to come back to you and ask for money. And I would prefer not to do that.
So earlier, we were talking about options if this was smaller, say, a third smaller. I don't know how that would be acceptable to the people in Woodbury. To me, just losing 10 foot of that building would make it so you don't see it in your view of all those houses there. You know, it'll be down in the trees more.
Yeah, so for every floor, we lose 8, or we gain or lose 8.
What's that?
Well, for every floor, it's 8 units. So if you take out one floor from each of those units, it's 40 units. Just to give you an idea.
Say that again?
Well, it would go, if we did 5 buildings at 2 stories versus 3, it would go from 120 to 80.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I can see that, you know.
I think
But
what
I was
Tom's
just
question is,
wondering, what, is that even worth looking at?
does it prohibit the
Is it,
grant?
you think
Does it
it's
make the numbers
acceptable
not
to the city
feasible?
or to the people?
I think we could look at the numbers and tell you, I don't know what it makes, does it make it more feasible for, for the Woodbury community? We just need to ask them. I don't know.
Yeah,
Is
sure.
there any, and I keep going back to it, is there any concern on the development side that this study states that it's suitable for 30 to 50 and we're putting 120?
No, because that's a housing needs assessment and housing action plan. When you do a market study, it specifically identifies the site and the regional draw and gives you an absorption rate for specific
And I
house.
understand that we could do 50 here, 50
Right.
here, 50 there, and that would meet the housing assessment, or study, right? I'm curious why it says 50 units on this particular site. Like, I understand that we're trying to build that whole study.
That was just a concept, Derek. That wasn't like a for sure, like this is what it could sustain. It was a recommendation of what could go on there.
And the infrastructure.
And that's fair. I think also it was more of a mixed use, like, hey, where's duplexes, apartments, there was multiple uses. Ours is just meeting one of your needs versus meeting several of them for different types of housing. I don't know if that makes sense.
I guess I'd just like to bring up one other thing that David had said was, so the property to the west, that's all industrial zone, correct?
I believe it's I-1 light industrial. I don't know the exact name, but it's I-1.
I mean, technically, if somebody wanted to build an industrial site there, they wouldn't need to get any of those property owners' approval. They could just build it there, and it would be literally in their backyard.
Yeah, well, literally in their backyard, and they'd have access off Barker. I don't know what street that is, but
Woodbury Drive.
well, no, the other one right here. What's this one? Right, but the fire department would say you need 2 accesses potentially, and they would need another one.
Questions, anybody else? Well, I think Marlon laid the process out for planning commission. We'll do this again, what do you say, 26? Based on your recommendation, council will make a decision. And the information we gather, council can make recommendations as part of our approval process. And you want to move an access point, something like that, if it makes sense. And then the developer will have to make the final decision based on the cost.
Chris,
Yes.
Chris, I will say that planning and zoning has already voted on the replat and or give recommendations on the replat and the zoning. So this on the 26th would be going just to council with their recommendations. Now, a site plan on down the road, if it gets rezoned, a site plan would be going, of course, to planning and zoning and then to council.
Okay, cool, Marlon, thanks.
So I guess getting back to the potential of trying to have a different access or a cul-de-sac to eliminate traffic, is that anything that can be looked into before that meeting, or is that too rushed, or how, I mean?
I think we would do if you guys have a recommendation for us, please, tell us, because we can,
My recommendation.
we can then look at it and at least draw it and work
Yeah.
with staff.
And you'd have to get your city engineer involved and, check utilities, check, whoever owns that I-1 ground across the street. If you're gonna do a cul-de-sac there, cul-de-sacs take up a lot of room. They're a big round circle. So, obviously the city owns part of that. So that wouldn't be an issue, but the issue would be the other side of the
I think
street.
that might make it more palatable.
Yeah, and the other person that I would check with is the fire department.
Right. Huh?
Attorney truck radius.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know that's gonna change the fact of the location. I mean, I know what you're saying, Randy, you're trying to, and I get it, but
I
I don't
think-
think that's gonna change the argument of losing the open space,
No, but I
the
think,
proximity to Woodbury.
I
Those are
think
the
no matter what
concerns.
location you're gonna choose, you're gonna potentially always have some, feedback as far as,
No.
not in my backyard type of a thing, so I guess.
No, agreed, wholeheartedly, like,
At the end of the day, you still gotta try to accommodate, but still maybe do
and I
what's
wasn't
best for
saying
the
that, I was
city.
saying that I don't know that a cul-de-sac is gonna drop half the people's opinions that are concerned about this, is what I was trying to say.
Well, they're still probably not gonna like it, I understand that. It might make it more palatable.
Going once, comments, questions? What do you think? We're done?
I think so. You touched a little bit about the public outreach the week of the 18th. We can send out an invite, or if council wants to propose a date for that week so we can get it on our calendars. I think our intent for that is for it to be more interactive. So, maybe between now and then we have the Dragoos put in a alternate entrance or whatever that looks like. We have poster boards, we have the public that can come up and talk to the developers, staff, council, P&Z. We want this to be more interactive and informal and really answer those questions that they have. So Mayor, I guess, however you want to proceed with choosing a date.
Which month? This month?
March 19th, Tuesday.
And what time?
That meet with you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, March 19th? Yep.
The time doesn't work with me. I'll be out of the state.
I thought we already had something on the 18th, no, or?
You just said the week of
The week of
the
the
18th.
week of the
Okay.
18th?
Mhm. So what time are you thinking, Chris?
5 o'clock?
Sure.
6 o'clock? When's everybody off work?
6?
6?
Have like an open house, open house, just, okay.
Yeah,
So like 6 to 8?
6 o'clock at Center Craig?
sure.
Brian, is that open?
You don't have access to that right now?
Okay,
I'll check with you in the morning. too.
or we can do it chamber if you gotta,
That'll be an issue, you can do it in the chamber.
yeah,
Center Craig?
okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Alrighty.
Thanks for having us back. Appreciate it.